So what we're going to do is first we'll talk about stress, conditioned fear, memory, hormones, and the brain circuits. I'm going to give you a little lesson in endocrinology and neurobiology to bring you up to date. There's some great advances that have occurred, some of which occurred right here in San Diego at the Salk Institute. Then we'll take a break at 10:15, and we'll start up again, and we'll talk about the pathophysiology of stress, how this extends into disorders like generalized anxiety disorders, GAD, medical and dental phobias, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and sleep disorders. Then we have a long lunch. There's a reason for that. So it's from 11:30 to 1. You can do whatever you wish during that period, but I will be back here at 12:30 to answer questions. So I just do a free-for-all questions from 12:30 to 1. You can ask me about anything. I'm particularly an expert in grafting fruit trees, so if you want to know, I've successfully grafted avocados, 3 different avocados, a lychee, cherry moya, a couple of citrus, and I'm very proud of that. Okay, so you're most welcome to ask me anything, drugs to fruit trees. So that brings me to me. Who am I? I am what I am, Popeye said. So how many of you have actually heard me speak before? A few of you. Okay, so you know that I did the willpower series, and we've taken the willpower series, and there was a chunk of it you might remember, on stress and how that feeds into bad habits. And we've taken that and expanded it and brought it up to date, I hope, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, this was developed by James Iyer and Peter Sterling. It was then embraced by Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller and ourselves and my colleague Michel Lemoyle in Bordeaux. And we've basically come to argue that allostasis is probably the norm. That's what we normally do in this modern stressful world. And after all, we're talking about calming the overactive brain. And so there are multiple ways that you can move into this allostatic state, and you adapt to the allostatic state, and normally you function fine, all right? But it creates a load on the system. And I'll explain in a concrete example in a minute, using one of our presidents. But it produces a load on the system, and that load is like weighing you down and can ultimately, if it keeps being built upon and not allowed to return back to the homeostatic range, end up with pathology. So we have stressors. We're going to see in a minute that we have a system built in our bodies to respond appropriately to stressors. We have appropriate behavioral responses to stressors, and they trigger physiological responses. But if they are repeated and there's not time to return to homeostasis, the system starts to change. The individual differences are quite critical. Some people have very strong resilience to stressors, and some people are very vulnerable to stressors. I was listening to Piers Morgan on CNN the other night, and he had Chelsea Clinton on there, and it was mostly about politics, but I guess he opened it up to the audience, and I guess he had chosen his audience. And the relatively famous movie actor Goldie Hawn stood up and asked what about training our children in resilience? I thought it was a brilliant question. It set everybody back on their tail that were on the panel and spluttering a bit. But it is a really critical, important question that we're not addressing, truthfully, in our educational systems or in life in general. So think about that as we move through today.